Have you ever heard of the term fractional leadership or fractional professional? Wonder what the heck that actually means? Then you'll want to tune in this episode because my guest actually started his own fractional agency. So he helps both the business side and the talent side. And he's offering a lot of advice with regards to how do you market yourself, how do you negotiate, and or how do you scope out work. So you'll want to tune to this episode if you've ever been fractional curious. Let's dive in. Welcome back to another episode of The Leader Within. Today, I'm excited to introduce Ahmed Abdelrahman, co-founder and COO of Solace, a fractional talent marketplace that connects startups and small to medium-sized businesses with pre-vetted fractional executives and professionals within days. Given his extensive experience with business advisory and human capital consulting via international firms like Ernst & Young, and then launching his own firm, Ahmed has gained deep knowledge and expertise in helping startups and businesses of all sizes and industries, and that is why I'm excited to have him share his insights with you. Well, welcome, Ahmed. So usually people like who work at like big four consulting firms, etc., are glorified, right? Because it's like great
Hmm.
reputation, great pay, whatever it may be. So I would love to hear your founder story going from that corporate life to launching Solace.
Thank you for the very warm welcome and intro, Angela. And so I really stumbled into consulting and I saw it at the beginning really and today as well, more so as an education to become an entrepreneur. And so I graduated with my BCom in accounting and then I was thinking, I'm probably not going to become the best accountant when I want to do this. What else can I do? I really wanted to start a business, but I had no idea where to start. And so I thought consulting would be a great executive fast track in a sense. So I'd be able to set the leadership table from the beginning and help start to understand and see how they approach all these tough conversations regarding where are we going, how do we address this situation, how do we approach this acquisition, how do we address this people problem, how do we oversee this conflict, like a lot of lessons to be learned. It was great. And so I was the first employee of a boutique firm called Stack Consulting, and I moved down to Calgary for that. We'll be operated across Western Canada, and we really punched above our weight class. We worked in a lot of strategic planning and business planning projects, a lot of reorganization projects, so organizational design, mergers, acquisitions, divestitures, a lot of the change management around that, and so this was across a number of different industries and publicly private as well. So I got a really good feel at the beginning of my career regarding what I want to do potentially the long term versus not what I enjoy, what industries do I like, how do they all operate, and just a really good foundational knowledge to build on early on. And within my third or fourth year, I knew that I wanted to eventually go off and become an independent consultant so I could then have the white space and, lack of um, conflict of interest or, confidentiality or anything like that to then pursue all these different business ideas potentially. But in order to do that at such a young age, I needed a strong name on my resume, even though I had the core skills and some great experience. And so I thought, pursuing a big four firm would be great for that. And had a great friend who started off as a client at one of my municipal clients. They eventually went over to Ernst& Young and they reached out and they thought I might be a good fit. And, I was like, oh, I don't even want to travel too much. I don't want to, I don't want to live out of a suitcase that much and everything. But fortunately, the Edmonton office had some local projects. And so I got to stick around while also getting some exposure here and there across the country. And so that was great. I spent a couple of years at Ernst & Young and continuing to specialize in that human capital aspect. And so I was part of digital transformations, leading the change management for multiple functions, and as well as a lot of continuing to work on organizational design projects and really get to understand the people aspect of businesses and the key skills that are required to achieve certain goals and how you organize those skills into teams and how do those teams collaborate with each other and who's accountable to what and what success looks like in certain roles and functions and disciplines. And again, awesome experience. And then it got time to start my own practice. And so I fortunately got promoted to manager and left soon after. Started Monero Partners, continuing to double down on the consulting side of things and finally having that white space to pursue other avenues. But ultimately, yeah, consulting was awesome, and it really, you come out of school and you believe that you learned so much and you know so much, and then good leaders will give you a slap back to reality and be like, you really don't know too much. And the sooner you switch to having that learning mindset and you become a sponge, is when you really start to expedite your professional development. And that's what happened to me. And so it took me a while to get there, 4 6 months, but once it did, I all of a sudden became super keen on having those difficult conversations. What can I get better at? Please give me constructive feedback. And the more I saw it after those difficult conversations, the better person I became, and the better professional I became. And I think that really provided a strong foundation and developed the resilience really required to then become an entrepreneur.
Thank you for sharing that journey. And something that I want to dive a little bit deeper into is when you talked about the learnings piece, right? So I think sometimes when you go into entrepreneurship, a lot of people externally might look at it as like, wow, like you have the freedom, the flexibility, like they see all the good, but sometimes they're
Mhm.
like, they don't get to see behind the scenes of the struggles and everything that you have to overcome. And sometimes you're building the plane as you fly it, right? So for you, what would you say is like one of the biggest challenges that you've had to overcome that has shaped the trajectory of your business today?
Instantly, what comes to mind is you think that you have a little strong risk tolerance when you start off in entrepreneurship, but then when you make the move and you get started, and then a month or two in, you're like, okay, this is a lot harder than it actually is, especially when it comes to the financial security and just having that safety blanket. There's no more biweekly check coming in. When I went off on my own, I was thinking, 2 3 months, I'll land a nice project, I'll start getting paid like all the rates I see independents getting paid. Of course, nope. It's a lot harder. And so having the ability to transpose that into really strengthening how we manage cash flows early on, and then as money comes into the business, what you do with it. Without that learning early on to really build up a reserve to spend wisely, to really understand the minimum expenses required to extend the tenure of your entrepreneurship journey and startup, especially when you're bootstrapped. It was a good lesson to learn, but it was really hard and something I underappreciated. And I've had folks come to me in many instances and ask, if I'm looking to transition to start my own practice or go off, what do you recommend I do? I suggest get started while you've got that safety blanket and you've got that security, because it's a much smoother transition. And I feel that once I stopped using energy on stressing about the finances, and once that shifted to really doubling down and spending that energy on building the business and growing the business, it really was a game changer for not just for myself, but those around me. Because even at one point my partner was saying that it felt like there was a great cloud around me. And when you're an entrepreneur, one of the main motivators for many of us is looking to provide a strong uh, future foundation for your family. And so when you're doing it for your family, but they're telling you, hey, you're not really the same person anymore. There's a gray cloud around. That was a rude awakening for me too. And just really not overlooking like the financial aspect of the transition can really put you in a better mind space and those around you as you start building your business.
I appreciate you sharing that. And one of the things that I've heard commonly from those who switch from corporate into their own like endeavor is they talk about how the first one, two, and sometimes three clients are the hardest to be able to acquire. So for you, looking back at what you started with from a biz dev perspective versus where you're at now, what would you say has really helped you secure those first maybe three clients? And what advice would you offer based on your experience?
First off, one of the biggest lessons for me was not overthinking things like networking. At the end of the day, all it is catching up with cool people that do cool shit. And the best thing about being an entrepreneur is you get to choose who you collaborate with versus not. And so I took a step back at one point and I just stopped trying to sell. And I guess even taking a step back further, one of the first questions I asked a boss of mine when I started consulting is, how can I sell without being a sleazebag? And and it was tough even for my boss at that point to answer. But what it came down to for me is just helping people with problems and showing them and creating awareness that you can help when that time comes or if that problem arises in their life. And so I had a big shift in business development being just relationship building, but also just seed planting, because you don't want to just aggressively pursue something if it comes up. You actually want to be there before it even happens, because the person, Andrew could be like, oh, Alma can actually help me with this fractional resource. We talked about this before. But it's not a pushy thing. You're coming to me. And so I think that was a big shift. But also one thing I wish I did actually was, before leaving corporate world, really tap into the network at whatever company I was at and really engaging with everyone around me. I was at EY, and I feel like I barely had conversations with all these other people, not just within my city and office, but across Canada and across the globe, because it's just crazy what all these cool people leave when they leave, all the cool stuff that they do. And so one thing I always tell people too is just to just shoot a message on like your internal website or on your internal Slack or Teams, just to random people. Hey, I'm just looking to connect and develop new relationships and learn from other people's journeys. Would you like to connect? Only bad people will say no to something like that. And so if they say no, perfect. They just saved you, a lot of angst, and you wanted to build a relationship. But, people will open their doors, and even people I haven't seen in 10 years, like BD gave me a really good excuse to catch up with some old friends. And some of them, will reach back out in a couple of years and be like, hey, I could actually help you out with this. A guy that I didn't even talk to for 4 years from EY emailed me a couple months ago for a potential big project that his wife's leading at his client. And I haven't talked to him forever, but he just had a couple of good chats when I was at UI, and then he sent it out later. And then so another lesson I would share is that, not to burn bridges. And I know it's a bit cliche, but in business development world, you have no idea who will reach back out to you in 8 to 10 years. And by all means, like, all this being said, I'm not a business development guy. Like, I like the imposter syndrome is still there. I'm a traditional consultant, and like me and my co-founder laugh all the time. Like, man, I'm great at putting my head down and just working. And that's what the firms love in their workforce. So this whole business development muscle was a brand new muscle to build, but I knew as a founder, it needs to be founder-led sales, and you can't just pawn it off. And so I need to learn that. I need to feel the grind. I need to feel the value that these folks bring, and step into their shoes and really gain empathy for the sales folks. And now I understand why they're some of the top paid people in the business. It's crazy. And so yeah, those are just a few lessons learned, but also some of my journey developing as a business development professional. And by all means, it's a continuing journey. But I definitely learned a lot so far.
Really great call out on that founder-led piece, and then just building connections wherever you go. And the whole concept of catching up, I think I'm still trying to be okay with that, in terms of like,
Mhm.
I never want people to think I only reach out when I need something. And then sometimes what ends up happening, though, it's like based on like the ebb and flows of your life, you only end up catching up when you're like, okay, I can finally breathe, right? But I think people actually have empathy around that, when you're like, hey, you know what, like, I'm so sorry, like, it's just a lot has been going on the last few years. We've kind of lost touch. I noticed you're doing X, Y, and Z. Would you be open to catching up so I can learn more about what you're up to and how I can potentially help? I think that approach, like, most people are like, okay, like, I'm more receptive to that than if you blasted a message and was like, hey, I haven't talked to you in a few years, but this is what I'm up to. If this is a fit for you, like holler at me, right? And most people are like, bye,
No.
right? Like, for the most part, unless if it's perfect timing and you had like immense trust with that person, that they would actually be receptive to that, because most people don't want to be sold to, right?
Mhm. Yep. And business owners, they can smell that. Leaders, they can smell that. And like, being in the startup community, we've actually won fractional engagements, which we'll get into. just from genuinely being involved in the community and them seeing us at the events, not selling, just engaging. And we may be creating awareness about Solace and everything, but we're no sort of there to learn about the cool startups coming up, what the community is up to, how, how this, each city is driving their entrepreneurial community, and just that sense of genuineness and just like wanting to just be there and be a part of it. People will pick up on that. And when it comes to like even reaching out to catch up, I was like, hey, it's been a while. Do you want to catch up? And then we'll talk about work. We'll talk about their dog. We'll talk about, the potential kids on the horizon, wedding, whatever. That's the fun stuff. And so I feel, again, it just comes down to relationship building. And you don't want to be that guy your name pops up on someone's phone and it's like, oh, he probably wants to sell me something, and that's like, even, I don't even want to be that friend. It's like, oh yeah, like we'll make sure to catch up. I'll hit you up in a couple of weeks. Like if I say that, I'm gonna make sure to do that too. And so yeah, there's a lot of like there's a blurred line when it comes to BD, because you're really relationship building. It could be a personal thing, it could be a professional thing, but the values that you have as a person really show in the BD side of things, and vice versa. And so you got to make sure you have a good head on your shoulders if you want to be a good BD person in the long term, which is why we prioritize long-term relationships over short-term revenue.
Well, speaking of that piece, I wanted to switch gears into the fractional in terms
Mhm.
of how did you identify like the gap in the market and how are you filling that gap today, right? Because the concept of fractional is not new, right? It's been around for a few years, but it's been ramping up in terms of the awareness and the value from it.
So when I was out supporting and working with clients under my firm Monero Partners, and my colleague with me, Carver DeLu, who became my co-founder and CEO for Solace, we found ourselves and we were supporting people with growth planning and scaling and organizational design and all the consulting discipline services that we provided before, to all these different growing businesses, small to medium, even some bigger municipal services too. We found that clients, they found value in the deliverables and the project, but more so they found a lot of value in connecting them with the folks that were popping up in the recommendations aspect of our project. As well, so you might need a part-time supply chain to really help establish these vendor relationships and get your procurement system set up, or you might need a controller to come in and really help clean up your financial back end and your month end close if you really want to pursue this project. And so and at the same time, a lot of our projects were coming from referral partners that were consultants, but all across different disciplines. So we had people like yourself that were exceptional HR professionals. There was CFOs, there were data analytics, there was supply chain, there was operations, tech, product, all these epic professionals, and we just fed each other work. And over a year and a half, at one point, we had 200 plus conversations with all these different types of businesses and professionals, just getting our name out there from a consulting perspective. But it wasn't really grabbing the traction that we wanted. And so we were taking a step back and thinking, we've developed this epic network. How can we really activate it and bring it to life? And considering the different types of disciplines that we had relationships with, it was almost like a lot of corporate service functions. And so we were thinking, okay, so like I started to Google, outsource corporate function business models. Like maybe we can just like provide some kind of teams. And then I came across the notion of fractional leadership. There's a couple of communities down in the States, and it blew my mind right away. We were like, this might be something, because I was like, wow, this is brilliant. Because the gist of it that I got, and we spoke about this quickly last time we spoke, if you take the hat of consultant off and you put the hat of a fractional executive on, the way you're perceived is completely shifted when it comes to the business side of things, because all of a sudden they don't see you as just a third party coming in to produce XYZ deliverables, send them over to email, then give you an invoice at the end. The fractional executives and professionals, they're accountable to outcomes, not just deliverables. They're bought into your team. They're bought into the vision. They're in the mud with you. They're saying something should be done, and then they actually see it through, and they can grow with the business, and they're not just an individual. They're not just a service provider. They're an individual. A lot of people seek that individual versus service provider relationship too. And so we were thinking, okay, this could be it. We have a bunch of people that could, deem themselves as fractionals. Maybe we pursue this avenue, and we know the States is roughly, 5 years ahead when it comes to concepts and models. It's like the leading practices in the business world in general. And so, okay, we're going to be a little bit ahead of the curve here, but let's just, let's set it up. We'll give it a shot. And then we looked up a couple models from the States. A couple of them, they only connected VC-backed startups with fractional executives that came from VC-backed experience. And we thought that was that marketplace aspect was awesome, but we were thinking, especially in our own backyard in Alberta, there's a lot of great founded businesses and small businesses that aren't VC backed. There's a lot of exceptional professionals that haven't been at VC backed startups. So let's just broaden the model from that perspective and take it to market. And so that's how we stumbled upon it. And that was like fall 2022. And so, over the winter break, we frantically put together like a landing page. We were engaging a bunch of people to say, hey, would you actually even be interested in joining our roster? Because it's a two-sided marketplace. From the talent side, would you actually be interested in joining our roster? From the business side, would this even be worth it for you if you set this up? And both said yes. We engaged for just quickly 30 fractionals, and 29 said yes, one said no. Ironically, the one that said no was the first fractional that we hired. And so that really speaks to the model. And even going back to, it's really hard to win projects. That was another value add for us. Like, one thing I learned from my experience with Monera is that, damn, like it's people really underestimate, landing these projects that it requires not just experience, but knowing the right people. You might be better at something than someone, but that someone knows the right person to get them in the door. And so there's a few walls we had to climb that we realized were really worth climbing at the time. And so, yeah, so that's how we came to finding the business model. And we launched with 10, 12 different fractionals. So we had a couple CFOs, a couple CHROs, a couple operations folks, a couple supply chain, and then a few developers and product managers. And we think, okay, this covers, a good chunk of bases to just start off. And fortunately, we landed our first client within 6 to 8 weeks of formally launching. And then everything's really took off there. And then we continued to get applications to join our roster, and now we've had over 260 fractional executives and professionals apply to join over the last 16 months, and so that's great. And we've had a few cool businesses of all different sizes and startups and founded businesses running from the 70s and early 1900s. Hopefully, one of our next clients. And so it's been a ride. But once we stumbled upon this concept of fractional, we were thinking, this is something we really need to double down on. And, all of a sudden everyone's talking about fractional now. And so awesome. It caught on so much faster than we thought. And so now it's just a matter of taking that wave of, the early adopters and the folks like us who have a good pulse on the talent market and dynamics. We understand that it's on the rise, and now it's a matter of creating awareness across the business community, especially with business owners that are, out of touch and not on LinkedIn, or even enterprises that really need to shift how they hire, or unless they're going to be severely understaffed in many areas. So yeah.
Well, way to go.
Thank you.
Because it's not easy finding those early adopters for one, right? And then just refreshing that you took the approach of, okay, like what's actually working, because I think that sometimes Canada, we lag behind a lot, and I think in a lot of areas, right? And that's just like a respectful way of saying it creates space for us to learn from others who are ahead of the game. And so I'm gonna dive a little bit deeper from like the perspective of those who are fractional curious. If you could offer one piece of advice as to how they can market themselves to benefit or communicate the value to like a prospective client, what would that look like?
A fragile COO can mean so many things. A business strategist can mean, so there's all these different names and roles and all mean so many different things in different contexts. So if you advertise yourself as a certain role or function, you're leaving a lot of room for assumption from the reader's perspective to understand what you do. So really dialing in on the specific scenarios or situations that people call upon you for to either fix a problem or to really realize the best of a certain opportunity. I think the more tangible that you can make the value add that you bring to a business in a certain fractional role will resonate with people, because those are the instances that they'll see in their day-to-day versus a posting for a certain role, which might come too late, even in some cases too. And so if you're doing a good job planting seeds, going around telling people exactly what problems you solve, specific industry situation, the more specific you are, that will stick in people's minds more than a fractional COO. Because a fractional COO, there's so many different people that wear that hat. So many people wear that hat, but certain scenarios, people will tie that back to you. And that's one of the specific questions we ask in our intake meetings is, as we're out and about, what are the specific situations or cues that we should be looking at, keeping an ear out on, that should be thinking, you know what, Angela would be perfect for that role. And the more clear you are in that, you're helping others help you grow your business as a fractional. And so that would be the best. And I know you said one, I'll give another one. Get off LinkedIn. It's necessary, but especially, we're like relationship driven species. Like there's no replacement for a handshake, a hug, a good conversation with someone, like just like the good vibes really that you share with someone that resonates with someone. And you might not be the perfect fit for certain instances, but they might enjoy working with you, and they might be like, Angela might not be the person, but she can figure it out, and I know I like working with her, so we're going to bring her in. And so I think, yeah, so I would say that the two things there: get crystal clear on those situations to help people help you, and also, just get off the computer and start talking to people and having those catch up.
Hey, you know what? I appreciate that extra golden nugget that you dropped. And the other piece that I wanted to chat about is a negotiation tip. Everyone wants to talk about money from the perspective of, it's like, how do I negotiate? Is it dollars per hour? Is it retainer? Is it based on value? Like, there's just so many different ways of going about it that sometimes it can be overwhelming, right? So is there a model that you've found that has worked from the fractional perspective that you would recommend those who are fractional curious to consider as they go out and negotiate projects and contracts?
What we've learned is that we really need to diagnose each situation before proposing a certain hourly rate or retainer and whatever it may be. In some cases, it's a very predictable amount of work that may fluctuate up and down week to week, but only within a certain hourly span. Then that's a perfect opportunity for a retainer. But again, I feel that the number one priority when it comes down to negotiating, especially like this is let's just say it's a first time client. I would just stay focused on helping them as soon as you can, and articulating your value as soon as you can. And in some instances, you might want a long-term relationship with them, but if they're only proposing, a 3 month engagement for a small chunk of work, don't see that as okay, maybe I could just like try to get the most, put a big price tag on this project just because I'm only there for 3 months. Again, that comes down to one of the values that we work with, because if by showcasing really strong product quality and like good work quality and collaboration, it like that dollar value, it will become just another month on that invoice for them if you're really doing good work for them. And so I would say when it comes down to negotiation, don't try to squeeze as much as you can out of the first initial project. Take a look at the scope of work. If it's something that's truly unpredictable, give an hourly rate and also give them a maximum hours per month, to give them a sense of comfort regarding, okay, I know Ahmed's not going to blow the budget because we agreed that this is going to be the max. And that's how we do our engagements first off as well. So there's no minimum, but there's a maximum because we understand things need to be nimble. But at the same time, the client doesn't want to have any surprises, no surprises. Like I said, when it comes down to the predictable hourly rate, you can maybe put a retainer there, especially for folks that like the continuity and predictability of what they can expect on a month to month when it comes to the invoices. But also if it's something like a full-time engagement for a certain number of months, whatever your hourly rate is, drop it a little bit if you're going to be getting consistent hours, 40 hours a week. If you're getting 300 an hour, for example, it's, and that's for independent practitioners, we don't see that many times unless you're an epic person. But don't be too greedy on that front. Again, for the sake of example, if you're at 300, maybe bring it down to 240 because you're getting a consistent 40 hours a week for X number of months. And so I think it comes down to number one, it's just delivering value right away. And as negotiations are happening, already start to think about, if you haven't already, how can you start to deliver value from the beginning? Because that's what people bring in fractionals for. You've been there, done that. Okay, let's see it from the beginning, from day one. But also keep the long term in mind too, and don't be greedy in the interim, because ultimately a 2-month engagement could end up as a 10-year.
Okay, I want to double click into that piece about not getting too greedy, but also remembering that we have bills to pay. So then it's like,
Yes.
how do you kind of balance that in terms of, let's just say you're like, okay, initially scope of work, you're like, I projected that whatever you are bringing me in for is going to be 25 hours, right? And then you're getting to that 25 hours and you're just like, oh my gosh, I just like uncovered this can of worms that is actually critical to the success of the outcome that I had promised to deliver on. And this is going to take another 15 hours. So how have you approached conversations like that? Or maybe sometimes it's just 1 to 2 hours, right? There's those two extremes of 25 hours is a big difference versus 1 to 2. Are you like, I'm just going to eat the cost for the 1 to 2, but let the client know, hey, like technically speaking, we're above by 2 hours, but this time, like just I'm going to do you a solid and eat up those 2 hours. But anything beyond those 2 hours, we have to come back to the table and discuss whether or not this is something that you want to continue to pursue. So yeah, would love to hear your perspective on that piece.
Yeah, and so no, that's totally fair. And so as much as I can, I like to operate on a basis of no surprises. And so that doesn't mean avoiding these difficult conversations. And so let's say the scope of work was only going to be 40 hours. And at the end of it, there's maybe 2 or 3 hours for me to do. But, we set up the budget and it was approved for 40. Especially if it's one of my first projects, I'll bite the bullet just because it's only 2 or 3, especially if it was something that I missed and it was under my accountability. I'll for sure eat that up. But if it's gonna be another 20 hours, I'm hoping that I identified it's gonna be another 20 hours a lot farther than when I got to 40 hours, than closer to 40 hours, if that makes sense. The earlier on in the product I could handle. So I know we mentioned 40. This came up, and if you really want me to achieve the outcomes that we were speaking to, it's going to require another 20. It would cost this much. Are you okay with pursuing that? I feel that that's not something that you should write off, but also the best clients recognize the value that you bring. And so if they're saying no, it would be, and if it's circumstances out of their control, whether it's budget or everything and anything else, sure. But if it's a business owner and they're accountable to the budget and they're bought into the project and they see you genuinely were striving towards everything in the product, but this thing came up, I think it should be a completely fine conversation. We actually just had this instance. I'll give you a real life example. We have a private equity client, and one of the portfolio companies, they brought on a fractional controller to really enhance how they do the financial aspect of their the whole business, actually, as it relates to reporting and the month end, because the group level wants to see a lot of data a lot sooner, and then as they're growing really fast, they need to just systemize and increase efficiency around a lot of what they do in the financials. And so we had a fractional controller, did a great job. And it was his first engagement, and so he was super nervous and super keen to do a good job. And so he was working evenings and weekends and everything for free. But he wasn't asked to do that by anyone. He just took it upon himself to really make sure that, he's hitting things home. He ended up finishing the project 2 months earlier. And so he left 2 months on the table, which was like a lesson for him, but the client loved that. And ultimately, the client's at the top priority when it comes to that stuff. But at the end of that project, and we did a closeout and everything, the client came back and said, "Hey, can you help us out with this? Can you help us out with this?" And because he finished early and the client already agreed to pay for that additional 2 months, but didn't end up doing so, we're still charging per hour because the client said, "Okay, let's call him Bob. Bob really knocked it out of the park, did a good job. We value him." And at the beginning, the client's CEO, who was getting bought out by the private equity company, he was thinking, he was like, "Oh, this guy's so expensive at the beginning. I don't know if we want to pay so much, etc." And I was texting him texting him in the evenings, "Hey, can you help out with this?" Or, "Hey, can you do this?" And so it just sort of goes to show, if you articulate your value, people are happy to pay for your service. But it's a thin line, and it comes down to no surprises, but also making sure that you remain accountable for what you signed up for and for circumstances out of your control. Bring it up to the team and talk with them and share with them. And again, the good people will be there to talk it out with you, or send you away and say, "We're good."
Yeah, I appreciate that. And before we switch gears, I wanted to ask you from a scoping perspective, right? Because typically, if you're in the corporate world, all the tools and everything is given to you. So you don't really have to build up that muscle, similar to how if you're not in sales, you don't have to build up biz dev, right? So for you, like, is there a favorite tool that you use for scoping that is available publicly, or have you guys just developed your own? Because again, for those who are fractional curious, never done this before, just want to set them up for success, right?
The consulting experience is something I really lean in here too. And so we actually have an interview guide for every new client that comes in. It's not necessarily, question one, question two, but it's more of a make sure you knock these questions down to really nail down what that scope is. And so we don't necessarily use a specific tool, but the flow of the conversation typically is, tell us about your business. What's the current state in terms of team, revenue, markets, products? Just give us a full lay of the land. Why did you reach out to us initially? What are you looking to achieve? Why do you need this role? What skills are required for this role? What experiences are required for this role? What budget are you working with? Who will this resource or resources who will they be working with? And ultimately, take a step back. It ultimately starts with the outcomes. What do you even want to achieve? Based off of that, what are the skills that are required? And then what does that look like in terms of expertise, seniority, and then really break that down into, okay, if we want to achieve that, leveraging these skills, here's what we need to do in terms of the set activities. And then you could start to break it down by hours in terms of, if we think it'll take this long for XYZ. But ultimately, that's just all theoretical. You really learn what needs to be done in the first couple months of the engagement. And so I suggest, as much as possible, try to really nail down the scope with the client to a level where you can get started, but create that expectation and create that communication mechanism early on in the product, whether it's a week to week update or bi-weekly updates. Say, "Hey, so we mentioned that it was going to be this. As I dig into the business, it's really looking like XYZ. And so this is how I think we need to go in the future." But what we're also seeing, fractional CFOs and fractional CTOs are doing a discovery phase as the initial project itself to sort of safeguard themselves from scope creep, but also, not really bringing in the scope that they need, but they don't know yet in the long term. And so sometimes even starting off with the discovery phase just to get a sense of what truly needs to be done for a set number, like a project-based kind of mini project, and then go from there, which sort of goes back to what I was mentioning before around delivering value right away by not, obligating a client to a 12-month project, which may cost 6-figure plus. Like, hey, let's start off with the 4 to 8 week. I don't even know what you need help with, but let's figure it out. We'll work through it. I'll give you an honest quote at the end. If you like me, you think I'm doing a good job, let's revisit that and see if I can help you going forward. And that's much more approachable, much more easier to digest. And it goes back to one of the concepts we talk about in terms of try before you buy, whether it's a fraction for full-time or small project for a big project. That will really start to ease, tiptoe into a good relationship and hope you set up for a good engagement and relationship going forward.
Love that approach because one, it doesn't handcuff your client to you. Second, it creates a buffer, especially when you're like, I honestly don't know how many hours this is going to take me, right? Like, just because I can give you this, but I want to make sure that I set you up for success. That's why I'm going to build in this discovery phase, right? For whatever fee that may look like, but you know that if I do 100 hours versus 20 hours, it's on me. It's not on you, right? It's just you're committing to this. And then after that, I'll put together like a blueprint for you if you want to stick with me. Great. If not, I'm going to recommend X, Y, and Z to you, right? Because that goes back to what you talked about earlier, is that we can't always be in rooms where the projects are happening and advocate for ourselves. So why would you not do that for someone else? And then one day it's going to come back to you in some shape or form, right?
Exactly.
So as we slowly wrap up our conversation, when it comes to unleashing the potential of individuals and organizations, what's the first thing that comes to mind for you?
Emotional intelligence and the willingness to have difficult conversations. I feel that Solace, we're not a humongous success. We aspire to be a big success. We're not a humongous success just yet, but what we've achieved to date is thanks to our team's willingness to actively have tough conversations with each other. And a tangible example, before I get to the example, ultimately at the end of the day, we're not robots, we're humans. And this is especially in a relationship driven business and a co-founder relationship, it's tough to really have honest, genuine activity and relationships and productivity in your business when there's harboring feelings that might have emerged from little things that your co-founder did, or whether they did something, or someone on your team or your boss or whatever organization or context that you're in. I feel that actively seeking out the hard conversations will strengthen your relationship, as well as really start to pull out the potential, because at that point, nothing is holding you back if you've let go all these negative feelings, and also articulating how positively impacting other people around you are, because those conversations aren't just, you did this, bad, but I actually really appreciated X, Y, and Z, and you should continue to do that. And so for a tangible example, at Solace, we do like bi-monthly business planning. Every session starts off with, or we have a pre-session if it's a longer conversation, one-on-one conversations. So Angela, like, what are the things that you appreciated about me over the last couple months? And what were some of the top things that you think I need to improve on, or things you want to discuss? And you have no idea sometimes what can come out of those conversations, or you're not expecting certain things to be said. But every single time, if both people go into it with the understanding that we're having this because we care about each other, we're going to come out of this better. We're only saying this because ultimately it's better for the business and it's better for ourselves. It can be super powerful. And so we're like, and now I understand why business partnerships, can be super frail, especially early on. But the long tenured ones, I'm learning that they have active, honest conversations with each other. And this is something I learned early on in my first couple of years in consulting too. Like I actively sought out, like I said in the beginning, feedback from my bosses and everything, but I also was never afraid to provide that feedback in return, and it always came from a good place. So however, and there's always a good, blunt way to respectfully articulate a tough concept or a tough piece of feedback. And by actively practicing that, you're not just going to create better relationships within yourself, but as a leader, if that ripple effect happens across your organization from a cultural perspective, you're going to really see everyone bring their best selves to the table every day. And ultimately, that's what you hired them for, and that's what you need them for to achieve your goal, because everything is really hard especially in business. And if just a couple conversations are holding you back, it's on you as a leader to sort of be that example and initiate those tough conversations. And so, yeah, I'd say it's on the softer side of things. It's not a big sales breakthrough, innovative approach or anything, but I think ultimately this is something I learned early on. It's going to stay for the rest of my career. It's going to stay for me personally, and it just unleashes the potential, not just businesses, but group dynamics, sports, families. Like it's just again, there's a lot of blurred lines between BD focus and business and real life and personal aspect, and so this is something that everyone should consider.
Hey, kudos to you. And I think that's so important. And there's nothing soft about that at all, because if you think about it, a lot of the solutions that could have been resolved if you had actually engaged the right stakeholders to solve it, right? Because they're willing, able, and felt safe enough to have those tough conversations where it's like, maybe consider this, right? Or even in our personal lives and in working lives where how many times have we in the past let something just get swept under the rug, and then one day it blew up because we didn't nip it at the very beginning, right? And then use that as a learning opportunity. So, Ahmed, last question to you is, what is top of mind for you? So whether this is how people can help you, or this is what you kind of want to throw out to the world.
So what I'll say is that fractional is the fractional talent space, and the concept is something that it's not just for growing businesses, it's for all businesses. By 2030, the majority of the boomers and the last of the boomers will sort of be retiring from their roles, which will leave a big gap in the workforce, because traditionally they sought after the FTE roles, but the incoming generations, the millennials, the Gen Zs, a lot of them are starting to lean more towards fractional. A lot of them want to work for part-time for multiple companies and go snowboarding on a Wednesday kind of thing, but they might be an epic data scientist or a CFO, and by companies not leveraging fractional as early as now, they will be losing the war for talent and be losing out on high caliber talent, especially big companies, especially for big companies going through transformations that require a lot of modern skill sets. A lot of those folks wouldn't traditionally go to a municipality for an FTE, but if it's a cool data transformation opportunity for a year and a half, and they know those big governments can pay for properly for those rates, it could be an awesome engagement for an hour and a half. They do well for a city, and then they come out in a year and a half, the light at the end of the tunnel, and everyone's happier. And I feel like I genuinely feel that's the future of the talent marketplace and the talent space. And so if you're an enterprise leader, I'd heavily consider pursuing fractional, or even just learning more about it. And I'm happy to have those conversations, bringing the perspective of supporting enterprises as a consultant, but also seeing it in the day-to-day, working with multiple right now. And so, yeah, I'll leave it at that. And it's a good time. Thanks so much, Angela.
I appreciate you sharing all the golden nuggets, and just, yeah, you've given a lot of practical advice. Now you guys all know where to hit up Ahmed, because I will have his links in the notes below. And to everyone else that's tuned into another episode, thank you so much for your time and attention. It means more to me than you'll know, and I can't wait to stay in touch with you on my next episode. Till then, stay safe.